To enjoy this episode ad-free, please visit patreon.com/forensictales.
Forensic Tales discusses topics that some listeners may find disturbing. The contents of this episode may not be suitable for everyone. Listener discretion is advised.
On June 21st, 1978, a tractor operator was working in a grape vineyard near Arvin, California, when the tractor disturbed a shallow grave. Inside were the skeletal remains of a young girl. Investigators collected her fingerprints and took dental x-rays, but neither produced a match. Without a name, they couldn't retrace her final movements, speak to her family, or determine who may have wanted her dead. For nearly 48 years, the girl buried beneath that vineyard remained unidentified, but she wasn't simply a Jane Doe. She was 15-year-old Michelle Louise Collier, and identifying her would require forensic technology that didn't exist when she disappeared. This is Forensic Tales, a special episode on the murder of Michelle Collier. Welcome to Forensic Tales. I'm your host, Courtney Fretwell. Forensic Tales is a weekly true crime podcast with a forensic twist. Each episode features real stories highlighting how forensic science was used to uncover the truth. If you enjoy deep dives into real cases and the science behind them, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an episode. And if you want even more content, including monthly full-length bonus episodes and early ad-free access to over 300 episodes, you can join our community over on Patreon. The support there truly helps keep the show going. To learn more, visit patreon.com/forensictales. And one small favor that makes a huge difference for the show. If you're enjoying Forensic Tales, please consider leaving a positive review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It really helps other listeners discover the podcast. Today's episode is a little different because this case just broke a few days ago, and it happened right here in my home state of California. So instead of breaking it down in a regular Monday episode of the show, I decided this story deserved a special release. So let's get into the case of 15-year-old Michelle Louise Collier. Before we begin, I want to be completely honest with you. Since this is a very new case, very little has been released publicly about Michelle's life before she disappeared. We don't know where she attended school, what she loved to do, or even the exact circumstances under which she vanished. Those are all details I like to cover in a regular episode of the show. But what we do know is that the people closest to her didn't call her Michelle. To her family, she was Shelley. At the time of her disappearance in 1978, she was only 15 years old, a girl with her entire life ahead of her and a family who loved her. She lived in the city of Fresno, a place about 170 miles south of the state capital of Sacramento, with her dad, Mom Maria, brother Kevin, and sister Cynthia. Growing up, she had a really special relationship with her father, who sadly passed away before she could be brought home. Here's what Michelle's sister Cynthia said about their relationship in an article for SF Gate. "You're with Daddy, now in heaven, just as you always wanted." That brief comment suggests there was a special connection between Michelle and her father, even if the family hasn't publicly shared many details about their relationship. Michelle disappeared from Fresno sometime in February 1978. But beyond that, very little has been publicly revealed. We don't know the exact day she vanished, where she was last seen, or how she ended up over 100 miles away in Kern County. It's also unclear whether Michelle was formally reported missing at the time. To understand how she could have simply vanished into thin air for nearly 50 years, We have to step into a time machine and look at how police handled missing teenagers back in 1978. Today, if a 15-year-old goes missing, it triggers an immediate multi-agency response. Amber alerts flash on highway signs, and social media feeds light up across the country. But in 1978, that's not how these cases were treated. Back then, if a teenager disappeared, the police almost automatically slapped them with a label: willful runaway. The prevailing attitude among police departments was that rebellious teens just didn't want to follow their parents' rules. Officers would often tell frantic mothers, "Don't worry, she'll come home when she gets hungry or runs out of money." Because of this bias, police routinely refused to even open a formal missing persons report until days, sometimes weeks, had passed. And even if a desperate family managed to get a report filed, the technology of the era was working against them. There was no centralized internet, no national computer system tracking missing kids. If Michelle was reported missing to the Fresno Police Department, that piece of paper stayed in a physical filing cabinet in Fresno. I don't know if that's what happened in Michelle's specific case, because none of that information has been released yet, but it's entirely possible no one took it seriously. All we know is that Michelle vanished one day in February 1978, and her family spent the next 4 decades not knowing whether she had actually run away and something else happened to her, something that no family deserves. June 21st, 1978 was a blistering, ordinary summer day in Arvin, California, a small agricultural town sitting at the very southern tip of the Central Valley. That day, a tractor operator was out working a rural grape vineyard right off South Wheeler Ridge Road in Kern County. He was out there doing the kind of routine work he probably did every single day, cultivating the soil between the rows of vines. But as the tractor's machinery churned up the dirt, it caught on something unexpected. The driver climbed down from his seat, stepped into the dust, and looked down. And as soon as he did that, he found himself staring into what appeared to be a shallow grave, buried in the dirt were human skeletal remains. When Kern County Sheriff's deputies rushed to the vineyard, they immediately realized they were looking at a crime scene. The body had been hidden there for months. Investigators estimated that she had been dead for approximately 3 to 4 months, a timeline that, decades later, would prove broadly consistent with Michelle's February disappearance. But because of the summer heat and the passage of time, there was very little physical evidence left behind. The pathologist couldn't even determine an exact cause of death. Although there are still so many unanswered questions about exactly how she died, authorities classified the case as a homicide. But the full basis for that determination has not been publicly released. There were, however, 2 heartbreaking details that stood out in the dirt. When detectives carefully brushed away the soil, they found the victim was wearing 2 white metal necklaces wrapped around her neck, and hanging from one of them was a round religious medallion. To the detectives, these necklaces were supposed to be the golden ticket to solving the mystery. They took photographs of the jewelry, ran her fingerprints, and took dental impressions, fully expecting someone to recognize her. But as we know, the phone never rang. No one in Arvin knew who she was, and nobody looking for a 15-year-old girl in Fresno had any idea that her favorite necklaces were sitting in a Kern County evidence locker 120 miles away. With no name and no leads, the vineyard case grew cold almost instantly. By November 1978, just 5 months after she was unearthed, the county quietly buried her in an anonymous grave at the Arvin Cemetery. For the next 48 years, she would simply be recorded in cold case files as the Arvin Jane Doe.
Most people don't realize how much of their personal information is being bought and sold every day. Data brokers are making billions pulling details about you from public records and the internet, then packaging and selling it usually without your consent. That's how your information lands in the hands of scammers, spammers, even stalkers. That's where Aura comes in. Aura actively removes your data from broker sites and keeps it off. They also instantly alert you if your information shows up in a breach or on the dark web. But Aura goes beyond data protection. With one app, you get a VPN, antivirus, password manager, spam call protection, dark web monitoring, and even up to $5 million in identity theft insurance. All backed by 24/7 US-based fraud support. Other companies might just sell credit monitoring or just a VPN. Aura gives you all of that together at the same price competitors charge for just one service. Start your free trial today at aura.com/prevent. Protect yourself now at aura.com/prevent.
In terms of forensic evidence, investigators had very little to work with. Advanced forensic testing was still years away, and because the remains were already skeletal, many of the traditional clues police would normally rely on were gone. So investigators collected what they could, including dental x-rays, fingerprints, and the personal items found with her, and hoped that someday the technology would catch up. And I know that's a line I've said in so many previous episodes of this show, but that really was the reality of investigating unidentified remains in 1978. And without a name, there was only so much detectives could do. They couldn't retrace her final movements, speak to her family and friends, or determine who she may have been with before she died. They couldn't even begin making a meaningful list of suspects because they knew virtually nothing about her life. They had a victim, but they didn't have a starting point, and eventually, every available lead dried up. But as the calendar turned to 2007, forensic science was rapidly changing, and detectives began to realize that the answers weren't out there on the streets, they were buried in the soil of the Arvin Cemetery. In 2007, more than a decade before the Golden State Killer investigation put forensic genetic genealogy on the map, the Kern County Sheriff's Office returned to the unidentified teenager's case. Coroner personnel discovered that no blood samples had been collected during the original investigation. So to move forward, they first had to go backward. The young woman's remains were exhumed from Arvin Cemetery, so investigators could finally collect a sample. You can imagine the hope surrounding that moment. Nearly 30 years had passed since she was discovered, and forensic science had changed dramatically. Perhaps the technology of the 2000s could finally reveal the identity her killer had tried to bury in 1978. Investigators successfully recovered a sample and sent it to the California Department of Justice for comparison. But there was a problem. For a traditional identification to work, investigators needed something to compare her profile against, usually a sample provided by the family of a known missing person. And at the time, there was no matching family reference sample in the database. So once again, the testing produced no name. Investigators finally had her profile. What they still didn't have was the right person to connect it to. By 2015, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children had joined the case and produced a facial reconstruction of the girl. Then once it was complete, her image, along with everything investigators knew about her, was distributed as widely as possible in hopes that someone would recognize her. But facial reconstructions aren't perfect. They're educated estimates based on the shape of the skull, expected tissue depth, and whatever details investigators can determine about a person's age and ancestry. They can suggest what someone may have looked like, but they can't perfectly recreate her face, hairstyle, expressions, or all the little features her family would have known. And after so many years, even someone who had known her might not have immediately recognized the teenager in that reconstructed image. So the renewed publicity generated attention, but it didn't produce her name. Once again, investigators had taken the case as far as the available technology would allow, and once again, they were left waiting for the next forensic breakthrough. In 2025, Kern County investigators decided to try something different. They sent the case evidence to Othram, a private laboratory in Texas that specializes in identifying unknown victims through genetic genealogy, and a name you've probably heard many times if you're a regular listener of this show. Scientists at Othram used the sample to build a much more detailed profile than investigators had been able to create back in 2007. In simple terms, the earlier testing could only look for a direct match already sitting inside a law enforcement database. This new profile allowed investigators to search for distant biological relatives and then work backward through their family trees. And eventually, that research led them to a family in Fresno. Investigators contacted Michelle's relatives and explained that the unidentified teenager might be connected to them. Her mother provided a sample for direct comparison, and in October 2025, the results finally confirmed it. The girl buried without a name for nearly 48 years was 15-year-old Michelle Louise Collier. But her name wouldn't be publicly announced until July 2026. Confirming Michelle's identity also meant her family could finally bring her home. Her remains were reportedly disinterred again in April 2026. Then in July, they were released to her siblings so the family could give Shelley a proper burial. Her mother, Maria, was now 85 years old. After spending almost 5 decades not knowing what happened to her daughter, she finally had an answer. But it was an answer no parent would ever want. Michelle hadn't simply left Fresno and begun a new life somewhere else. She had been lying in a cemetery over 100 miles away, buried beneath a name that wasn't hers. Identifying Michelle is an important step, but the circumstances surrounding her death remain unknown, Kern County Sheriff's homicide detective Ashley Thompson said at a news conference just a few days ago. And Detective Thompson is 100% correct. While forensic testing has finally told us who the victim was, it doesn't shed any light on who her killer is. And for the very first time, they could begin reconstructing her life in the weeks before she disappeared. They could ask who she knew, where she spent her time, whether she had any connection to Kern County, and who had access to a vehicle capable of taking her more than 100 miles from Fresno. They could also return to old records and interview surviving relatives or witnesses with a specific person in mind, not just an unidentified set of remains. According to Detective Ashley Thompson, investigators have already developed a list of possible suspects, although their names have not been released. We also don't know whether any physical evidence from the original grave could still contain evidence belonging to someone other than Michelle. And that distinction is important. The genetic testing identified the victim. It did not identify her killer. But for so many years, detectives couldn't meaningfully investigate who killed Michelle because they didn't know who Michelle was. Now, for the first time, they have somewhere to begin. At this same press conference, Michelle's sister Cynthia addressed the killer directly, saying the discovery devastated the family, particularly their mother, who is in her 80s and not healthy enough to attend in person. Your cowardice act affected our entire family, but make no mistake, law enforcement will find you and hold you accountable, she said. Whether you are already incarcerated or dead, you will be found. May God bless your soul because you are going to hell if you're not there already. She then spoke directly to the sister her family has spent 48 years trying to find. You didn't deserve to die this way, Shelley. Barely 15 years old, still a child with your whole life ahead of you. I'm sorry that we didn't protect you, but you're with Daddy now in heaven, just as you always wanted. We love you, Shelley. there are still so many parts of Michelle's story that have not been made public. We don't know the exact circumstances surrounding her disappearance, how she traveled from Fresno to Kern County, or who buried her inside that vineyard. Investigators say they have developed a list of possible suspects, but for now, they aren't releasing any names or explaining what may connect those individuals to Michelle. And because this identification was announced only a few days ago, I don't think this will be the last update we receive. As investigators begin reconstructing Michelle's life and following the leads that come with finally knowing her name, I'll continue following the case and bring you any significant developments. Before we close, I also want to mention that I personally make a monthly donation through DNAsolves.com, which helps fund the forensic testing used in cases involving unidentified victims and unsolved crimes. These investigations can be extremely expensive, and many law enforcement agencies simply don't have the resources to pursue genetic genealogy on their own. If you would like to help fund this kind of work, you can make a one-time or recurring donation at DNAsolves.com. There are still thousands of unidentified people waiting for the same opportunity Michelle finally received, and sometimes public donations are what make that testing possible. But while forensic testing restored Michelle's identity, it didn't tell us who killed her. That is the question investigators must now answer. Anyone with information about Michelle Louise Collier, her disappearance from Fresno in February 1978, or how she may have ended up in Kern County, is asked to contact the Kern County Sheriff's Office. For nearly 48 years, she was known only as the young Jane Doe found buried beneath a California vineyard. Now she has her name back. Her name was Michelle Louise Collier. To the people who loved her, she was Shelley. And hopefully, identifying her is only the beginning. To share your thoughts on this new and developing story, be sure to follow us on social media at Forensic Tales. And if you want to listen to new episodes early and ad-free, consider signing up for our Patreon at patreon.com/Forensic Tales. You can get early ad-free access to new episodes and monthly full-length bonus episodes for as little as $3 a month. Your support on Patreon directly helps to fund the show's production, research, and editing costs. And as an independent, one-woman podcast, your support truly helps to keep this show going. Forensic Tales is a Rockefeller audio production. The show is written and produced by me, Courtney Fretwell. If you'd like to support the show and help fund research, production, and editing, you can do so with a small monthly contribution on Patreon. Patreon supporters get early access to ad-free episodes. And if you enjoy the show, leaving a positive rating or review really helps others discover it. For a full list of sources used in this episode, visit forensictales.com. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next week. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.